Hello?
Morning, Roxy.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do my show. I am excited to talk to you because I've been a fan of yours since your last album, Quintet, came out, and that was one of the things I first started playing when I got my first radio show back in 2019. So thank you so much, first of all, for doing
Yeah,
this.
thanks for having me.
And congratulations on the new album, Disparate Parts.
Thank you.
It sounds fantastic, and I mean, I imagine it must be grueling getting out such a big project like that. Like, how do you feel now? How does it feel finishing a project in general, and how is this project concluded for you?
It seems like a relief. I mean, this is my sixth album now, and so each one I think feels a little bit different, and you get more familiar with the process, but at the same time, there's always different places that I end up putting more into it as I progress through each one. So each one definitely feels like a huge undertaking and a huge process that, it starts years before it actually concludes. And so by the time you get it out there, I think it's a relief, and it feels great to share it with people. You've been working on it for so long, and then at the same time, it's kind of like you're already past it by the time other people get their hands on it. You're like, okay, we're thinking about the next thing, and so it's an interesting cycle.
Yeah, well, you've got so many albums out now. I mean, I figured you'd have some to say on like what that process feels like. Does it feel like it's getting faster? Do you feel like you end up trying new things, like trying to break new ground when you approach a new project, or does it almost feel like you're falling into a rhythm of like how you like to express yourself in that medium?
I definitely like to change things up and challenge myself, and I think being an artist in general for me is really about trying to be able to execute my voice, be able to communicate and express myself, and the more comfortable you get with every medium, whether it's the saxophone or like a recording project, I think all of that is like working on those skills, and the more comfortable you become and the more skills you acquire, the more fluently you can express yourself. So on the one hand, it becomes easier in certain ways because you get better at that process, but at the same time, I think I'm trying to express more complicated things, and in the first project, maybe you're just trying to do it, just try to say like, okay, what does this even mean to do this process? Whereas now it's like, okay, I've done this so many times, now I can really get into like different effects on the back end, like getting into the nitty gritty of different reverbs, or different drum sounds on different tracks, or things like that. And then even in the composition process, it's like getting a little bit more detailed and complicated. So I think I'm always trying to push myself. I'm always trying to grow. And that includes, my playing, the composition, the band itself, the way we play together, and really the recording process itself as well.
Yeah. Are you doing a lot of that production hands-on yourself? How involved are you in the engineering? Like at what point do you start to outsource?
It's been different for every project. This project is on Outside in Music, the record label, which it gives you a lot of artistic freedom. So I was more hands-on in this one and Quintet versus the two previous ones, which were out on Positone. In all of my projects, I have been very involved in terms of I've been present during, from start to finish in the mixing and the mastering. And in this one, I was also the producer, which is true for the majority of my projects. And I worked with Johannes Felscher, who did the mixing and mastering and editing. And we worked together on things that I hadn't really done before. So we got really in there with, effects and just post-production sounds, trying to create some textures through the sound. And he's doing all of the hands-on, the actual engineering work and the mixing work and the effects and all of that. So he was associate producer, meaning like he's doing the technical production side, but I'm really like driving, okay, I want to hear this effect, or I want to get this outcome, how do we achieve that technically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's got to be such a great way to, I guess, learn about production. Because I went to school for music industry, but I'm mainly a bass player, and it's so hard to put those kind of things into word. Like I've done like a lot of work in Pro Tools, and I know my way around effects, but I just haven't done it enough to even be able to, when I have an opinion about how I want something to sound, it's so hard to articulate it and reach what you want. So being able to work hands on like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely. It's been a great learning process for sure. I think, the more you know about these different parts of it, the better you can express yourself. And because we all have an idea about what things sound like from listening to recordings, but once you start messing around with like what makes something sound different, it can be really exciting to kind of unlock those secrets. And I like to always be present in those processes, because as you watch somebody who's an expert in that, you start to understand like, oh, that can make such a difference in the overall sound of the whole record,
Yeah. Now, when you're like producing a song that you wrote, are you more intent on preserving the like original character of the performance, or will you Frankenstein your tracks to like make a produced like you focus more just on how the track sounds and not really like go as much off of directly what was recorded? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it depends, because those things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, and I think every single track is going to be different. Like, I always, if possible, would use as little tracks as possible, like, or I should say as little takes as possible.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, like, the first or second take will be the main take that I use, and I think that that's usually because the energy is there, and there's something about the energy being great on a track that you actually can't Frankenstein together.
Yeah.
It just kind of comes through, and you might not always know why. You're like, this is just definitely the take, and there's mistakes, but we can fix those. But the energy is there. So I try to start with that, and like which one has the best energy. Sometimes it especially like if it's for instance, like if it's a ballad, one solo might be a better solo energy wise and another solo. And so sometimes you can make those edits as long as the tempos match up and everything. And I'm not afraid to do that, because I think everybody is doing that. And like, you'd be surprised, like everything is Frankenstein together nowadays. And as long as the music itself in that moment is honest, I don't think it matters like, oh, we took this take of this solo and this take of this solo. I think that especially if I'm the producer on it, I'm producing something that's my vision, and that includes like how the solos are supposed to be shaped and all of that. So I think it's somewhere in the middle there where it's like I once you start Frankensteining too much, you really do lose that flow, and you might not know why, but the energy just gets a little stifled. And I think the things that are too perfect end up being a little boring. I listen back to my favorite records from like when, middle school, high school, they're all like Blue Note, post bop, and they're not perfect.
Yeah.
You can hear mistakes. You hear wrong notes in the solos. You hear mistakes about the form, like coming in too early, things like this. And I think that it doesn't take away from something being really exciting to listen to. So I try not to go too overboard with fixing mistakes, but sometimes it's hard when you're in the studio or in the mixing studio, and you're just like, well, I have the ability to fix everything. Where do I stop?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, it's what you're trying to get across. It's like as long as the sound that you like and it's like your intention is there, I feel like it's really just a tool. I feel like there are people who try to be like, oh, I just want everything to be 100% live and 100% real, which is amazing. But I know you appreciate artists like Kendrick Lamar or, RH Factor, or like groups that are heavily produced. So I figured I'd see where you fall on that, but it's more like I guess just a spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think like I'm trying not to be that sort of jazz purist where it's like where is the music today, and let it reflect that, and let it reflect the sound and the technology and all of that. So
Yeah.
sure.
Now, there's a lot of artists that I've heard you talk about in interviews that I'd love to ask you about. Although I know you're a big fan of Wayne Shorter. I'm sure you talk about him a lot already. But I love Wayne Shorter, so we're gonna talk about Wayne Shorter.
Okay, cool.
That's just someone I heard mentioned a lot in your interviews. What place does Wayne Shorter hold in your musical heart? Is he like top dog?
I would say yes. I mean, I think that it's always changing, but there's something about Wayne Shorter that's remained so inspiring to me because his career has spanned so many decades, so many eras of jazz, and to me continues to be relevant and groundbreaking. And yet he is not about demonstration. He's not about technical skill. He's about art. He's about saying something. He's about being honest. You can hear from one note, you can hear that it's him and his music. You hear one note of him playing on a solo, again, from that same post-bop era, or you hear one note of him mid-90s, or you hear one note of him today, and it's all clearly him.
Yeah.
And so as like a macro idea, he just continues to inspire me in that way, where it's like, that's what I strive for. I just want to be fully myself. And it's so melodic. It just feels good to listen to his music. And I think it has so much imagination and playfulness. So
yeah. I mean, I always felt like, he's more of a musician than a saxophonist. I mean, you could also say like a composer than a saxophonist. But people look at someone like Coltrane and say like he's a technician. Whereas, obviously, Wayne Shorter's a virtuoso, but to me, I think he's just got such a specific sound. I always thought of it more like that. Kind of like another one of my favorite composers, Frank Zappa, was never, like, I hear guitarists say like, oh, he's not really that good at guitar, he's just noodling, but that stuff is coming right out of blues artists like Johnny Guitar Watson. He knows what he's doing. He just has a sound. Like he's not afraid to play the instrument the way he wants and to make committed choices in his compositions. And I've always loved Wayne Shorter for that. I feel like he's got this otherworldly sound, like he's from another planet. But
definitely,
for me, I'm more in love with like certain like phases of his music. Speak No Evil was like one of my favorite records when I first started listening to like actual like artists in that like history of just like American music. And but really, one of my favorite recordings of all time with him is Native Dancer.
For sure.
And I mean, those are just like the probably the two records that have influenced me the most of his. What's like a record of his that's done that for you?
I think like High Life and definitely stuff like from the 50s, 60s. I think I had like this compilation disc in high school, and it just had tracks from that whole era. And so as I've gotten older, it's like each of those albums are probably equally influential, but Night Dreamer and Juju and all of that. But I mean, they're just all great, and I love hearing him on the Jazz Messengers.
Yeah.
But I think again, it's more about like now that I'm getting older, it's like listening to him, going back to albums that I spent a lot of time with, and listening to how it sounds in the context now of knowing his whole career, and like rather than just being like, oh, this one is my favorite, Speak No Evil is my favorite or something. It's like, well, where did that go? Like, how did he take that? You create something so amazing, and then where do you go from there? Like, that's more intriguing to me, that idea.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I love so many different parts of his career, like Odyssey of Iska is another one of my favorites. I'm not always in the mood to listen to something like that, but it's like such a beautiful project, and he has so many different things like that, so many great compositions. And I was thinking of High Life before when you were talking about not being afraid to modernize and use new technology and producers, because what Marcus Miller did with the production on High Life was a totally different sound, but it fits so well with what Wayne was doing, because he's already so out of left field to begin with.
Yeah, totally.
But
and like that, I think it's that tune, "Children of the Night." Like if you hear the different versions of that, like that's exactly what I'm talking about. So cool.
Yeah. Well, I know we got to get wrapping up shortly, so again, congratulations on the new album, Disparate Parts. What's the story with that album cover? Did you make that?
My mom made it. My mom is a visual artist, and we were talking. We collaborated. She was asking me about the album and what it was about, and I was explaining what Disparate Parts means, which is really about these different sides of yourself that was the inspiration for the suite of music that appears, which is 4 parts. And each composition, the body, the mind, the heart, the spirit, and the title track are all about this idea of, really having different parts that if they're not integrated, you can't really realize your full potential in any of these parts of yourself. And whether I'm thinking about music, me as a musician, or me as a person, and different relationships, or, Roxy as a mom, Roxy as a saxophonist, Roxy as a composer, Roxy as a friend, we have these different parts, and really trying to be a higher self takes some work into integrating those parts. And so I was talking to my mom about this idea, and that I wanted real artwork on the cover, not just like a photo of me, Photoshop font over it or whatever. And she does a lot of work with like wire wording in her pieces, like in her exhibits and installations. So we were talking about the idea of using the wire wording for Disparate Parts, and I was like, it would be cool to have some type of body part represented, but I just don't really know. At the time, it was like I was recovering from having a C-section. My daughter was born, and I was just like, I don't have the energy to like go seek out some new artists that I don't know. And she's like, well, I could do something. And I was like, oh my God, that'd be awesome. And so we were just kind of hanging out at my house. She was there helping me recover, and she's like, let me take a casting of your face, and we can use that as a body part. And so there's a mask on the cover that's upside down, and that's my face. And so she took those 2 elements and photographed them, and then we kind of went from there.
Yeah, super cool cover, super iconic. I mean, and the compositions are also amazing. Love the new album. I hope everyone checks it out. And just before we go, can you tell everyone where to look out for everything? What else they should be, watching out for online?
Yeah, definitely. The website, roxycoss.com. You can order autographed copies. You can find the album streaming on all major platforms. And I hope to see you out there. Thanks for listening, and I hope everyone enjoys the music.
Thank you, Roxy. I hope to catch a show soon. But have a good day.
All right, you too. Thanks again.
Yep, later.
Bye.